Coming to you all the way from Norfolk, Virginia, Go On Productions, Earprov.com, Nerds of Comedy, and Push Comedy Theater presents The Funny Pages.
Welcome to The Funny Pages, the talk show about comic books. I'm your host, Sean Devereux. Welcome, one and all, to this really kind of hobby turned love affair that I've been having with comic books. Because of the pandemic, I don't get to talk to people about comic books and such. So I decided to create a talk show to talk about comic books in conjunction with the Nerds of Comedy and the Push Comedy Theater. And tonight I have one of my favorite people to talk comic books with. We are two sides of the same coin. He was a Marvel Comics fan. I was always more of a DC Comics fan. He was a WCW fan. I was a WWE fan. We are both original members of the Pushers Sketch Comedy, which morphed into the Push Comedy Theater. He's one of my dearest friends in the whole wide world. Welcome, Ed Carden.
Thank you, Sean. I'm very excited to be here. It's a really cool show, and I'm really excited to talk about what's probably my favorite comic book growing up. Yeah, because I'm a big Marvel continuity nerd.
You are a huge Marvel fan. What Marvel is to you, DC is to me, and I was always a big kind of DC continuity fan. But I really enjoyed. So for those who don't know, we are going to be tonight talking about What If. It is imaginary versions of real stories about imaginary people. Is the best way to describe it. What If was a series that started in the late 70s. They've had multiple runs throughout the years. The original was in the late 70s, where they would take key moments in Marvel Comics history and ask the question, what if this happened instead of that? I have a few issues of the original series. A lot of the ones that we're going to talk about tonight I have, and then the series was rebooted in 1989 and has been rebooted ever since. But before we get into What If specifically, talk to us about your comic book journey. Like, what got you into comic books and what did you love when you were a kid?
So, when I was a kid, especially like a young kid, I'd be in like the drugstore or like the grocery store with like my mom, and I would always see the spinner racks full of comics, and I would always try to talk her into buying them for me. And the thing about me though is that my parents didn't really like to buy comic books. I only got them every now and again when I was a young kid. So like for me though, when I really got into comics was when I found out that the local library had a lot of early collected editions, but it also had two books which I read like cover to cover, like multiple times. They were both written by Jeff Rovin. One of them was called the Encyclopedia of Superheroes, and the other was the Encyclopedia of Supervillains. And these books basically covered all the major characters from Marvel, DC, and even a lot of like Golden Age and independent publishers that had been putting out superhero comics. Up to that time, I think these books, like Supervillains, I think that came out in like the late 80s. And so like, so basically like I learned all the continuity for Marvel. I always gravitated more towards Marvel, from reading those books. And so when I finally got older and started having my own money to spend, I gravitated to the What If books right away, because, I just found it so fascinating. These books that took these stories, which, I had learned kind of weirdly from most people, just kind of like reading about someone writing about them. And just I really love getting into the minutia. And it's like I really love, looking at seeing like footnotes for like, when these odd characters or whatever appeared and everything. It just appealed to like, my sort of completist continuity nerd sense like right away.
I was very much like you. The library was my friend, and then my other friend. You know what? I'm gonna get off heads 1 second. Vamp for a second, Ed.
Okay. Um, yeah, I mean, like with What If, like the library growing up, they actually had a lot of cool stuff. Some of the other books that I really liked, the library had these books that were just like pages and pages of like cover art from like Golden Age comics.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would look at those. Those were great, like coffee table books.
My friend, when I was a kid, was the Overstreet Price Guide. This is the one, I think, from 1988. This is not my original. The original one fell apart, and when I started this show, I decided to get this as my good luck charm. So I found it on eBay for super cheap. But I would literally just read and look at the little teeny tiny pictures and stuff like that, and that's how I got a lot of my history. Sometimes they would say, first appearance of this character or first meeting of these two characters. So yeah, that's how I did all my kind of comic book research. And then when I met you, so we met in the very early 2000s. You and I were doing a play together, and I would come in and you would always have either was it a Marvel Essentials or the Marvel Masterworks?
Yeah, I mean, like, I got into both. I mean, I know that I only made but so much money back when I was in my 20s, so the essentials were a lot more affordable.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, like, when those came out, that gave me a chance to actually go back and like read the actual comics and like the actual stories and stuff for myself, because before that, most of my knowledge was mostly just, like I said, from reading books. I used to read a lot of Wikipedia. There's some pretty good Wikipedia summaries.
Did you ever have, was it the Marvel for DC?
The official handbook of the Marvel Universe. Yeah, I had a whole binder full of the ones they did in the mid 90s, the master editions. And I also went back and bought, they covered those in essentials, starting with like the first edition, but then they went and got the second edition. So I went back and got those and read all those cover to cover.
For those of you who don't know, DC had DC Who's Who, and then
I had a few issues of Who's Who as well.
Basically, what it was like an encyclopedia A to Z of all the Marvel characters, and it would kind of give like a brief, essentially like what Wikipedia is now, but each hero would get a single page where like their first appearance, team affiliation, and then just like a page long kind of synopsis of their origin story, essentially. So I had a
it's
lot
like
of those.
the one thing I'll give DC and Who's Who is that they went a little bit deeper cuts than the official handbook of the Marvel Universe did sometimes. You would get a lot of the more obscure like sci-fi and like horror characters that had stayed in continuity. Whereas like, a lot like with the official handbooks, like they didn't always go that deep. I mean, really, I think they only got covered if those characters were brought back in something like a What If #9, which we're going to talk about in a little bit.
So let's jump into this. So we are going to be talking about What If. So I put out a call to all our Push Comedy Theater community of comic book nerds, and you jump back with a couple of things. But one of the things you jumped back with was What If, and then you gave me a bunch of issues to check out, a couple of which I actually had read, some of which I own. The first one we're going to talk about is What If #4 from 1978. What if the Invaders had stayed together after World War II? This is actually one that I owned. Not when it first came out, but again, I'm a huge World War II Golden Age fan. So anything relating to the Golden Age, be it Marvel or DC, I started collecting. So I actually haven't, the Invaders I collected, and obviously this because it's talking about the Invaders. So why this issue?
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, before I even go into that, is that I'm also a huge Golden Age fan. Especially Golden Age Marvel. Although, I find Golden Age DC very interesting as well. Although, again, with Marvel, you have like much different characters in some cases, like and characters that like didn't get revived. So like all these kind of like oddities. But one of the more interesting and fascinating things about What If #4 is that this story actually became canon. Like after this, like this became the official, what happened to the Invaders after World War II story. It went and like, basically explained what happened after Captain America fell on the ice with the Spirit of 76, William Naslund becoming Captain America, and then him being killed in the story by Adam 2 and Jeffrey Mace, the Patriot, becoming the third Captain America.
So the Spirit of 76 was in a group called the Crusaders, which was created by Roy Thomas in the Invaders book from the 70s. And the
Crusaders
Patriot,
are an interesting character.
They're kind of like a DC pastiche of the Freedom Fighters. Because at the same time in the 70s, DC had its Freedom Fighters kind of World War II book going on.
And they fought a group called the Crusaders, which were very much like the Invaders.
You got to wonder. I'm assuming that they talked to each other back then. There's a couple of instances back in the late 60s, early 70s where Marvel writers and artists would pop up in the background of DC books and vice versa. In fact, there's a town in Connecticut that a lot of the stories from both companies are
I think it was Rutland, Vermont.
Yeah, they had like a superhero parade every year, so there are a bunch of stories.
That was a big like Roy Thomas thing. Like Roy Thomas added a lot of like his own personal fandom to especially the Marvel comics. I haven't read as much of his DC stuff.
Oh, he definitely did the same thing with the DC. The one thing I like about Roy Thomas, he kind of like one of his things that he likes to do is explain continuity holes. So obviously Captain America was published all the way into the mid 50s.
Like 1949, I think is when Captain America comics became Captain America's Weird Tales.
Yep.
And then basically became just a straight up horror comic after that.
And then there was a revival in the early 50s of where it was like as well like Young Men comics and Young Men and like I forget the others, like Young Men, like Men's Adventures. So what Roy Thomas is doing, so when Stan Lee brought Captain America back in the 60s, he disregarded all that stuff and said that Captain America went into the ice in
1945 or 45.
Yeah. But has never really said about this Captain America that was still going on after that. So Roy Thomas would come in and like fill in those holes. He did the same thing for DC, especially after Crisis on Infinite Earths, where Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman were taken out of DC continuity, or their Golden Age versions were taken out of DC continuity. He would do a lot of stories in All-Star Squadron and Infinity Incorporated, explaining who took Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman's place in those Justice Society stories. So he's like a fixer who comes in and like patches holes in continuity.
Yeah, and it's really kind of the interesting thing about kind of the big difference between Marvel and DC in terms of continuity. Whereas like with Marvel, their tendency, like Roy was kind of the guy that started it, but like then you had like people like Mark Gruenwald picking up the mantle. And it was like Marvel's tendency was to try to get everything to fit together. Whereas like DC would just retcon and just toss stuff out.
This is the other thing I want to talk about is the artist Frank Robbins.
Oh yeah, people love or hate this man.
He's got a kind of like a cross between Carmine Infantino and a little bit of Jack Kirby. But I did some research. So he had his own comic strip called Johnny Hazard that ran for years and years and years in newspapers. But he was also a writer. He wrote for DC Comics. He wrote Batman and Detective pretty much from like 68 to 1974, working with Neil Adams, and pretty much revamped Batman as we know it. Kind of took it away from the Silver Age, Adam West kind of vibe to the darker Batman that we know today. He co-created
that whole
Neil Adams.
Neil Adams movement.
Yeah, so he was the writer for a good chunk of Neil Adams' Batman stories in the late 60s, early 70s. He co-created Man-Bat with Neil Adams, but I had no idea. I just thought he was an artist. But when I started to do some research for this, I did looked up Frank Robbins, and yeah, he had a whole other career as a writer, which I didn't know.
It's interesting because for a while I used to hang out on a lot of like Golden Age Marvel, like internet message boards and things, and like so many people just couldn't stand Frank Robbins' art. And I know for me, it wasn't acquired taste. Like I didn't like it at first, but like after you read a lot of Invaders books, you get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like his line work and like especially his faces, aren't as clean as you would see from like Kirby or like, Buscema or some of those guys.
They're very, very angular as well.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's just something about it that I liked. It's funny because we were talking on an earlier episode, 2 episodes ago with Patrick C. Taylor, how as a younger kid, I did not like Carmine Infantino's work, but I appreciate it now. I got into the Invaders later, like late 80s. So, I mean, they had already wrapped up its run, and I'd been, reading comics for, 5 to 8 years at this point.
I mean, Invaders is kind of like firmly like a early Bronze Age book.
Yeah. Which I have almost a complete run. I there's still some holes that I need to fill, but I spent a long time tracking down Invaders issues. We have a question in for you and me. How has comic books influenced you in sketch writing and the characters you've created?
I mean, here's the thing. I've always been intimidated to write sketches featuring comic book characters that I like, just because number one, I'd like more obscure stuff. So I'm afraid that, our typical pushers audiences, especially back when we were doing like bar shows and stuff, wouldn't relate to it. But also just because I was always afraid that like we wouldn't be able to do the costumes justice. And like, it's like my thing is like if we're going to do like characters that I really like, I want them to like look good and be like identifiable. And, we always had a lot more success with DC characters because those t-shirts are more widely available, and you can come up with a pretty good mock-up of a Superman or Batman or Green Lantern costume pretty easily. Whereas like Marvel characters like Spider-Man, like forget it.
Yeah, Spider-Man is tough because you can buy a Batman cowl pretty cheap and just have the t-shirt. When we first started, I wrote a series of Justice League sketches, a ton of them that were actually kind of pretty popular for us, where I played Superman and our friend Brad McBurn played a very kind of curmudgeonly Batman. Courtney played a very ditzy Wonder Woman, and we had a pretty good run. I think I wrote like 7 or 8 Justice League sketches.
They were great. I mean, I always loved them.
And I think you can get away with writing sketches of kind of well-known heroes. When you start trying to dig deep into the lore, you have to spend half your sketch explaining who these B-list characters are, as opposed to the audience automatically knowing who they are.
Yeah, I mean, like I think the closest that we've come is when we used to do the Nerdvana improv shows. That's more specifically for a geek audience. So when we would do our improvs for those, and we did a few like MCU themed like Nerdvana shows. Like those were always fun because like improvising, we could get a little deeper into like Marvel minutia, or at the very least the minutia of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Also with improv, because you're not dealing with props and costumes, the audience is way more forgiving. So if I say I am Spider-Man, I don't have to have a Spider-Man comic because it's improv. The audience automatically just envisions me in the Spider-Man getup.
Yeah, it's like you don't have to have, like a shirt with a very intricate like crisscrossing pattern. I mean, like my heart goes out to like Ditko and some of these guys that design these Marvel costumes, because the DC Comics hero designers really made it a lot easier for themselves.
They really did. Although you see some Spider-Man art, especially like in the 70s. And what was the book that was kind of based on the Electric Company Spider-Man, like the Spidey Super Stories, where they would give up sometimes on doing all the cross hatching on Spider-Man's costumes. It would just become red. Thank you to Pam Francis, who has tipped us $20. Thank you, Pam. Pam is a hilarious comedian at the Push Comedy Theater, both in sketch and improv. She was in Panties on the Twist as well. So thank you, Pam. So all the money we raise is going to the Push Comedy Theater to keep our doors open during this pandemic. So any support you can give would be greatly appreciated. Any thoughts on What If #4 before we move on to the next issue?
It's just one of the things I like about it is that it really adds a lot more to the original Human Torch's backstory, with his creator creating a new android. And it's pretty cool that part of the plot of the Atom 2 android villain character was to create an android duplicate of Senator John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. Well, that's a question I wanted, because I know the broad strokes of the Marvel Universe, but not a lot of the details. So Atom 2, was that a character that ever came back?
I think I don't believe so. I mean, I know that one of the things that they eventually they did flesh out a little bit more about Professor Horton and like how he was able to build these androids. Like it turns out that Kang the Conqueror went back even further in time and met Professor Horton and helped him, basically used his future technology to help him like get the components that he would need to build these androids.
Sounds like
basically during the 1940s.
We have a phone call coming in. Matt, who do we have?
It's Brad McMurrin.
Hey, Brad McMurrin, fellow Pusher, co-creator of the Pushers and the Push Comedy Theater.
Yes, I've watched the whole episode, and it's greatly helped me up on my napping. But I was wondering, I had a question for the two of y'all on this. You were talking about how expensive the comic books were, Ed. What are we talking about here? What something like this cost for a guy like me that doesn't know?
Well, I mean, you got to remember back in the 80s, they were like 65, 75 cents.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was still money that my parents didn't want to spend.
Yes, by this point in time, when I started like really getting into collecting in the late 80s, early 90s, they were probably like $1.25.
Yeah, I mean, like when I started like using my allowance and like going to 7-Eleven, they were about $1.25. Maybe
and what
maybe $1.75. You got an annual.
$4.99. There's some $3.99 to $4.99.
Gotcha. And
but
then
with
last
less pages.
I loved y'all's answers about the costumes. I never would have thought about that. But my next question for y'all about these magazines or these comic books, I guess, would be, who was the one you were like most turned on by as a kid, and then tell me now?
You mean like by female superheroes, or just like what heroes did you just get jazzed about?
I'll go with both. Like me, like, you know, I'm a Smurf guy. Smurfette was everything to me as a little boy, right? Like, I'll ask that question,
Right.
but also Jokey Smurf was my man. So that kind of question, yeah.
For me, I would say it was a toss-up between Linda Carter, Wonder Woman.
Me too. Go on.
And Firestar from the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I always had liked Firestar. As far as I got very jaded in my not jaded, but just very obnoxious in my comic book collecting as I got older, especially like in the 90s. They would actually have swimsuit issues, which all it would be is like artists drawing all the superheroes in swimsuits, and I thought that was a disgrace. Like, I could not understand why somebody would want to spend money on.
You mean like they did like an SI, like a Sports Illustrated kind of like swimsuit?
Yeah, they would do Sports Illustrated, but it would be like, you know, like the She-Hulk, you know, in a bikini and stuff like that, or Mary Jane Watson in a bikini, and I'm like, who is spending money on this? This is ridiculous. They're not real.
Oh, I love that.
I mean, I'll be honest. Like, I know for me, it's like part of the reason why I collected a lot of Image comics back in the 90s is because of the way they used to draw the female characters. You know, very, very voluptuous, very over sexualized. You know, gave me more than just you know, great stories and you know, heroic deeds to you know, get my jollies on.
Matt just threw up a very busty, risque version of Firestarter. She did not look like that in the on the cartoon.
No, she did not.
I don't think she showed any cleavage. I thought her costume went all the way up to her neck, but that's what would happen. They would, all the comic book heroines would be very sexualized.
I mean, here's the thing, you know, if we're getting back to What If number 4, you know, Spitfire, Jacqueline Fallsworth, you know, not bad to look at.
So
Miss America
what was
too.
Your answer, Ed?
What was your no answer, one that you Ed? Would know.
Okay.
So for
guys,
those aside from Brad, Ed, give us one of your deep cuts.
My deep cuts. Let me think. You know, I'll go with one of your DC characters, one of the Global Guardians, Godiva.
Okay, yeah. Did she have
check her out as well.
Hair kind of almost like Medusa? If I'm not. Like,
yeah, I mean, she basically was the DC equivalent to Medusa in a lot of ways.
That's awesome. Hey guys, y'all keep on putting up this magic, man.
We're here for you, Brad.
I can't
go
get
back
enough.
To your nap.
Good God. All right, goodbye.
All right, that was Brad McMurrin, co-creator of the Push Comedy Theater with Ed and myself. Let's move on.
I feel patronized.
Yeah. Let's move on to our next issue that you wanted to talk about. What if number 9, which is what if the Avengers existed in the 1950s?
Yeah, so you know, this comic blew my mind back in the day. Mostly because you know, I had read a lot about you know, Marvel or the Timely, you know, Marvel was known as Timely Comics during most of the World War II era. I knew a lot about the Timely Comics characters, but I didn't know too much about the characters that existed when Marvel was known as Atlas Comics. Mm-hmm. And so you know, and you know, it's like, you know, I'd always been under the impression that, like, you know, superhero comics basically died in the 40s, and in a lot of ways they did. But what Roy Thomas did in this issue was he took a lot of these sci-fi and like horror comics characters that kind of could fit into that superhero mold, and you know, kind of strung this together and created this weird sort of 1950s like Avengers team. And you know, it's like he brought in the character Jimmy Woo, who was like the protagonist in the Yellow Claw series, mm-hmm. Which you know was an interesting although very racist by today's standards.
Oh yeah,
Kind of
even by the 19. This is 1978, I believe, as well. But
at the same time, that book, it was one of the first major comics to feature an Asian lead as the main hero character, Jimmy Woo. And it's like Jimmy Woo is a great character in the MCU, played by Randall Park to this day.
This is, again, same with you. I had no idea about the 1950s kind of Atlas heroes until I saw this. I think I saw this like in a dollar bin or something like that, and picked it up. So I actually own this issue as well. And I was kind of fascinated by these heroes that I never knew exist. So much so that Marvel Masterworks actually came out with the Atlas era heroes, 3 volumes set. I think I have the first 2. I never got the third, but it has like Marvel Boy in it. It also has like the 1950s Captain America and Human Torch stories in it as well. But I was always very intrigued by these guys. So it was Marvel Boy, Venus, the human robot, or was also
the human robot, now known as M11.
Yep.
They sort of retconned this story into Agents of Atlas later.
3D Man.
3D Man, who did not make it into Agents of Atlas because 3D Man was not actually a 50s character. He was a character that Roy Thomas created in Marvel Premiere in the 70s, but his story was set in the 50s.
And then you had the human Gorilla Man.
Gorilla Man, very popular in the Agents of Atlas books.
Yes, which actually, so this is another one that kind of became canon. I actually have the trade right here. They turned it into a miniseries in the mid 2000s. I think you can still get this on Amazon. This is great too because it has the Agent of Atlas miniseries plus the What If story, but it actually also has reprints of some of the stories where these heroes came from in the 1950s. So not a bad little find if you can get it on Amazon.
Yeah, and it's cool because the villains they got, it's like the Yellow Claw obviously had his own book in the 50s. Electro or the green Electro here was a 50s Cap villain. Yep. You have the Great Video, who I think was a Marvel Boy villain. Skullface, who was basically a zombie character from Mystic, which was a Marvel horror comic during the 50s. And then you have the Cold Warrior, who was a villain that was created in the 3D Man Marvel Premiere run. And you also have cameos by Namora and Jan of the Jungle.
Yep.
So it's like a wonderful sampler to sort of 50s era Marvel. And like I said, it was one of those ones when I would go to like Trilogy and I would go through the What If. I would go through the What If long boxes, and this was one of those ones where I saw, I was like, oh my God, I have to get this. Who the hell are these?
Exactly. I was the same way. And like I said, they didn't really show up much, I believe, until like Avengers Forever, which was a mini-series in the early 2000s where they started bringing them back. And then
it's like Avengers Forever actually officially destroyed their timeline.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Kurt Busiek brought in a new version of 3D Man, but I think called him
Triathlon.
Yeah. With George Perez.
Yeah, and that's the thing. 3D Man, Triathlon got his powers from the same. I think somehow from the 3D Man, the Triune Understanding Foundation somehow distilled 3D Man into some artifact or something. I didn't really read that run as much as I probably should have.
I read it when it first came out, but don't remember a lot of it. But I was one of those things. As soon as he popped up, because I had the What If, I knew who 3D Man was. So I always like it because, again, my Marvel history isn't as vast as my DC history, but I always like to pat myself on the back when there's some obscure reference that I actually get. And that one I did get.
See, another thing I really like about this issue is that normally what ifs, and it's something we haven't talked about that we probably should, is like normally what if stories are told by the Watcher, Uatu, who, you know, when he's not like trying to warn the Fantastic Four about, you know, some cosmic menace coming. Apparently he spends a lot of time looking at alternate realities in the Marvel universe. But in this issue, you know, and Uatu was part of it. It was actually the current Avengers team at that time. Iron Man had somehow rigged a parallel universe viewer. And so Iron Man, Captain America, Vision, Beast, and I can't remember the other character were
it was Captain America and Thor.
Yeah, we're basically watching this story play out on, you know, Tony Stark's conveniently created for this issue.
So
universe viewer.
Instead of the Watcher watching these alternate realities, you had the Watcher watching the Avengers who were watching these alternate realities.
I'll say this though, that like the Avengers, that's one of my favorite like Avengers teams. I'm really a big fan of Beast as an Avenger as opposed to an X-Man.
He's going to pop up in the later What Ifs that we're going to get into as well, but he doesn't fare very well in either one of those issues. All right, anything else about the 1950s Avengers? I know they've done some more stuff with it after Agents of Atlas. Supposedly there was like a team that had like Nick Fury on it, and I think like Sabretooth or something like that, but I never got that series, so I don't know a lot about it.
Yeah, and like, you know, the thing with Agents of Atlas is that it really kind of subverted a lot of these characters. Like Marvel Boy is like a grotesque like alien creature. And you know, they changed, they sort of modernized a lot of the characters for that. But you know, the one thing is cool though is that like Agents of Atlas was a pretty popular book for its time, and like these characters are actually not nearly as obscure nowadays as they once were, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I know, I agree. All right, so then we jump in. This was a request that we had from last week's guest, Will Harris, and it is, what if the original Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four? And this issue is just bonkers.
Yeah. You know, it's like, this is one that I maybe read like once before this, but I reread it again for this one. And, you know, it's like Jack Kirby did the art.
And he wrote it. And it was his first time because he had left Marvel and gone to DC and had just come back to Marvel. So this is the first time he's doing the Fantastic Four in 8 years. So it was kind of a big deal at the time. And there is some kind of really kind of cool, ridiculous Jack Kirby artwork going on in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. You know, it's like I said, rereading it again, I was surprised that Jack Kirby didn't take more shots at Stan Lee during the story.
Well, yeah, especially knowing what we know now about, you know, their relationship and stuff like that. I was looking for that, but he actually kind of treated Stan fairly well.
Yeah, like, you know, Stan didn't come off like a jerk.
Yeah.
In the story. So
which he does in most Jack Kirby interviews. I guess I'm assuming Stan still had to sign off of the book.
I'm guessing he did. Like, I mean, you know, despite the fact that like I don't think Stan signed off on much at that point in Marvel history. I think that he was letting a lot of other people do a lot more of the editorship at that point. But I'm guessing, you know, a book where his likeness is being portrayed, you know, definitely wants to take some care with that one.
And I'm not sure, this is 1978, I believe, as well. I don't know my Marvel history as much, but I think Roy Thomas may have been editor-in-chief
I
still at the
believe
time.
so. I believe so. Like, Roy basically took over after Stan kind of stepped down to mostly just handle the business side of things.
Yeah. And there's really not much to this story. I mean, it is some box delivered by the S Society or something or other.
Yeah, the S people.
The S people gets delivered to the Marvel offices, and it fires off cosmic rays, which turns Jack and Stan and Saul Brodsky and
Flo Steinberg.
Who was the secretary during those days, into the Fantastic Four. And they track it down. It takes them to Atlantis, where they meet Namor. But eventually it turns out it's the Skrulls.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Secret Invasion before it was cool.
Yeah. I kind of lost the plot there towards the end, so I'm not quite sure what the Skrulls were hoping to make.
Yeah, I mean, like, I would say that this is definitely a sentimental favorite for your previous guest, Will Harris.
Yeah. I think he just wanted it just because of just how utterly ridiculous it is. And I agree. Yeah, you're not getting it for the story, but some great Jack Kirby art. I think there is one panel with him doing the actual Fantastic Four, but then the rest, it's the Marvel bullpen as the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, like, we're not really talking about them this episode, but there are a lot of great what ifs involved in the Fantastic Four.
Mm-hmm. Oh, we have another caller coming in. Hello, welcome to the Funny Pages. Who do we have?
William Curry.
Oh, hey, William, how you doing?
I'm fine. Hope you're having a good evening. That sounds a really fascinating
we
discussion.
We love it.
Thank you. Do you have any what if memories?
Yes, and a question too, please.
Okay.
Sure.
The question I had was, DC had like their imaginary stories in the 50s and 60s, but has anybody ever heard why they didn't have a dedicated sort of what if series like Marvel did?
Sean, you're more the DC aficionado. You answer that, but I have some things I could add too, depending on what you say.
Yeah, because they did a lot of imaginary stories. Our very first episode, the Super Sons, that was all kind of imaginary stories in the 70s. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until the late 80s with Gotham by Gaslight, and then the one that came out after that they created Elseworlds, which is kind of like an imprint. So they kind of started throwing all their imaginary series under there. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't know why they never had a dedicated series, but it was the late 80s, early 90s is when they started creating their version of What If, which is around the same time that the second series of What If came out, was in 89.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like with DC is like, if you look at like their Elseworlds, they liked their imaginary stories to be higher concept, a more grandiose, more theatrical kind of divergence from the typical characters, as opposed to like, what if it's like literally like one event changes and then the story goes on from there. I mean, I don't know, DC just seemed less interested in telling those kind of stories and more interested in like changing up the settings, stuff like, like Superman Red Sun, really kind of like fundamentally changing.
And that's a good point, because you'll notice in this series, but especially in the second series that we're going to talk about, the 89 series, those what if stories literally would take a single event in Marvel history. We're going to be talking about like Atlantis attacks and the Evolutionary War, and what would happen if something changed in those specific events, where the Elseworlds, yeah, you're right, very much big picture. What if Batman appeared in the Victorian age? I
think the closest example I can think of is they did in like the late 90s, they did that series JLA The Nail, where like basically the plot line was that like Pa Kent had like a flat tire on the day that like Superman was supposed to come to Earth. And so like Superman like never, and like Superman ended up landing in like an Amish community and like never actually like entering the world of men. So like the story is literally about how the Justice League would form, and how like basically DC Comics continuity would be without Superman being around.
That's funny. When we were first talking about this episode, originally we were going to do half What If, half Elseworlds, and The Nail was going to be one of the ones I was going to suggest. But then we just started getting to so many What If stories that we decided to do a What If episode, and then we'll do a Elseworlds episode coming up pretty soon.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. I appreciate you calling in.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
No problem. Good talking to you, Wayne.
All right, so let's move on to another one of your favorites, which is What If Dr. Doom Was Good?
Yeah, what if Dr. Doom became a hero?
Oh, became a hero, yes.
Well, first off, the cover is a little bit misleading because, part of him becoming a hero, he has totally different armor.
Which is really horrible. I think I have it. I gave it. Yeah, here it is. It's not the best looking armor in the world.
I mean, it's certainly not as iconic as Doctor Doom's typical faceplate, and like more kind of like rough iron kind of design, as opposed to this very like golden knight design for the heroic Doctor Doom.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, my thing is that my favorite villain in any media is Doctor Doom.
Yeah.
Just love that character. Love the way he looks visually. And it's like, honestly, it's like Darth Vader is based on Doctor Doom visually. Lots of other characters have basically ripped off Doctor Doom. And like, he's this genius, but he's also the ruler of his own like Eastern European country. And one of the cool things about Doctor Doom, even in the regular 616 continuity, is that he hates the Fantastic Four, he hates the Avengers and the superhero community, but he's actually really cares about the people of Latveria.
Yeah, he is considered a hero in his home country.
And like is considered like a very good ruler, and has used his high technology to like better their lives. So it's like, if he didn't have this grudge against Reed Richards, like it's very easy to see him as a potential heroic figure. And so like basically in this story, in that moment where Reed Richards is about to kind of expose him for doing this illegal experiment when they were college roommates, instead of like casting Reed Richards out, he actually hears what Reed Richards has to say about his calculations.
His calculations were slightly off, which in the actual continuity, Doom dismisses, and it results in the explosion that scars up his face. But in this one, he realizes that Reed was right, and actually has Reed come in as his assistant. And because of that, they're able to get this device that allows him to kind of astral project and eventually save his mother, who is trapped in hell, which has kind of been like a recurring thing for Dr. Doom, is always trying to free his mother from hell.
Yeah,
but by doing that, calls the attention of Mephisto.
Yeah, Mephisto being one of the principal fear lords of the Marvel universe.
Mm-hmm.
Basically the most common sort of analog for Satan. It's one of the things that if you read some of like the you read some of the more supernatural Marvel stuff, it's like Mephisto is just one sort of kind of like demonic entity that is basically, Satan. There's other kind of fear lords that, basically in the lore of the Marvel universe also get confused for Satan.
And then you actually have, this is actually the third time Mephisto has shown up in these episodes. He showed up in when we were talking about the Defenders with Patrick, and also in the Christopher Priest Black Panther run, Mephisto showed up as well. So I think this is our first three-timer.
Yeah, I mean, he's probably the most common one, more so than like Satanish, who you see in Doctor Strange, and Marduk Curios, who actually posed as Satan in the original Ghost Rider comics.
We have a question coming in. What is your favorite live action portrayal of Doctor Doom?
There are none. they're all bad.
Oh, we have another call coming in. Hello, caller. Welcome to the Funny Pages.
Hey, this is Patrick C. Taylor.
Hey, Patrick. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing
Patrick,
well. I'm loving the episode.
Thank you. Patrick was on 2 episodes ago, Hard Traveling Heroes. He also is a big fan of What If. So when we do What If Part 2, it'll be our first ever 2-guest episode with Ed and Patrick.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, now I feel like I shouldn't talk about all the things I wanted to talk about.
Do it. There is a lot of What If to cover. We only have a little time
like
left.
It's a big series. Like, you know.
We're
scratching
the thing I want to talk about just a little bit is I got into comics a little bit later. I'm a little bit younger. I got into the 90s What If run that started, I think, in like 1989. As opposed to like this first run. Like, I think I even showed one of the first comics I really got into when I was on last time, which is What If Vision Had Conquered the World.
That's
which is a pretty interesting one because it's actually divided in half. One is like a utopian version where everything goes right, and the other one is a dystopian version where it all goes to hell. And for a kid, it just kind of blew my mind a little bit. I thought it was very.
And that's the thing when we talk about, we're going to talk about 2 issues from Volume 2. And one of the things that Volume 2 was very good at was portraying Marvel dystopias.
They really do. Like, that's the one thing I definitely noticed in the 2 issues that we're going to be getting ready to talk about is that
shit gets real bad.
Yeah, way more death and destruction than you see in the first series.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of brutality in the second series. There's one, What If Death's Head 1 Had Lived, which was written by the original Death's Head's 1 writers, and they killed a whole shitload of Marvel comic heroes, which they said was revenge for them having killed off Death's Head 1 back in the day.
You know what? Let's jump into those 2 issues right now. So, Patrick, I'm not sure if you're familiar with either of these 2 issues, but Ed picked What If the Avengers Lost the Evolutionary War, and then the second is What If the Marvel superheroes lost Atlantis attacks, or if Set, the god Set, came to Earth. Ed, why did you pick these 2 issues?
So it's like one of the things that I really liked about the second series, which again we're going to talk about more with Patrick in a later episode, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I'll actually get off. I'll let you guys talk about this, and I'll be glad to talk more when we come around.
Awesome, thanks, Patrick.
Is one of the things they did in the second series was the second series came out after like these like yearly crossover events became a more common thing. And so what they would do is they would take the opportunity in What Ifs to basically show what would happen if this like huge threat that basically the Avengers or all the Marvel superheroes were all banding together to fight if the Marvel superheroes lost that battle. And as
essentially each year the annuals would be Endgame.
Basically. And here's the thing, like those annual stories, those yearly crossovers, varying degrees of quality.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I remember I had some of the High Evolutionary War issues and then some of Atlantis Attacks. And then I kind of got bored of it. DC was doing the same thing too. And again, it was usually like fill-in writers and artists who would do the annuals. And this one is weird. So all the humans on Earth and pretty much non-mutant characters evolved into these like big-headed.
Yeah, I mean
creatures.
they basically evolve into the next phase of human evolution. The High Evolutionaries plot basically was to do this. You know, he basically sets off a bomb that basically floods the Earth's atmosphere with this, like, you know, basically with this, I don't know, I guess you'd call it element that basically makes everyone on Earth evolve to the next stage of evolution.
It turns all the mutants into almost essentially gods. It like amplifies their powers to the nth degree.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, in some cases, like it's a negative. Like Daredevil's senses become so heightened that he has to like live in a cave to basically, you know, block everything out. And this is a very interesting one because basically the High Evolutionaries plan succeeds and basically all wars on Earth end.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and basically all of humankind bands together, and they band together with the mutants who they settle all their differences with, and eventually using all their powers combined, and like regular people have vast like ESP and like telepathic powers. You know, they end up leaving the Earth. They end up like, you know, basically joining with the Eternals who have formed the Unimind, and basically going throughout the universe where they eventually merge with all the great cosmic entities of the Marvel universe.
They take out Galactus. They defeat Eternity and Death.
Yep.
And eventually just leave the universe.
And then they create a new universe.
Yeah.
And the High Evolutionary is they basically tell him it's like, you know, your plot may have succeeded, but you know, we've become better than you, and we've kind of surpassed your original goal. It's also very sad. Like Vision decides to kill himself because he just has no purpose anymore.
Exactly. And eventually the heroes that remained on Earth eventually kind of get old and die. You see like graves for Captain America and Hawkeye. I thought this issue was kind of boring. It was just a bunch of big head people sitting around talking. But you could also tell that this was like Wolverine was coming into, you know, his big kind of like status as like the anti-hero, the fan favorite Marvel character, because all the mutants, you know, have their abilities heightened, and they all unanimously vote to make Wolverine the leader of all of mutant kind. And like, I'm like, wait, what? That guy? And he even was like, wait, why me? And they give some reason for it, but it's pretty flimsy.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just, I mean, it literally become just exploring this crazy concept. And you know, it's like really the central premise here is that you know, the High Evolutionaries plot succeeding, you know, in a lot of ways, depending on how you look at it, makes things better for the Marvel universe.
It kind of does. It does end all war and stuff like that. And they all do.
Although, like you said, a lot less interesting.
Yeah, exactly. But now things
get less interesting when you get rid of conflict.
That's true. But one that is not, we're going to jump into issue, I believe it's 25 of the new series this is actually from, I have it written down here, 91 by Jim Valentino. What if Marvel had lost Atlantis Attacks? And this is one of those ones. This is brutal.
Yeah, I mean, like this is like this movie, like this, not this movie. This issue is basically like, you know, it's basically like sadness, like disaster porn for like the Marvel universe.
So they kind of explained there was like 6 things that the Marvel superheroes had to achieve in order to prevent the god Set from coming to Earth, and they all failed. And the heroes that were involved in stopping those 6 things all died.
Yeah, I mean, it's like in the in the Squadron Supreme reality, there was this artifact called the Serpent Crown that a guy used to basically take over the world, and also took over the minds of the analogs to the Justice League in that world. And but it turns out that versions of the Serpent Crown exist not only in the regular 616 continuity, but also in a lot of other dimensions. And in the original story, they got all these Serpent Crowns together in order to bring the Elder God Set into the reality. These rogue Atlanteans who didn't like Namor and who wanted basically the Elder God Set to take over the world.
And Set is like a gigantic kind of 7-headed serpent, who they then they take would become like the 7 brides of Set. So you had like Marvel Girl, Invisible Woman, Dagger from Cloak and Dagger, a couple others, She-Hulk, who are going to become the brides of Set, Scarlet Witch, and bear his children. So the heroes kind of take on Set and are wiped out pretty brutally. Like
it's like the street level heroes like Moon Knight and the Punisher had to stop this drug from hitting the streets of New York, which this drug turned people, like regular people, into serpent men. And so they fail, and like they turn into like mindless serpent men versions of themselves.
A lot of the kind of street level and lower heroes. A lot of the X-Men get turned into Spider-Man. But like Beast and Wasp and Hank Pym, Yellow Jacket or Ant-Man, they get taken out. I think Ant-Man gets eaten by one of the serpent heads. Iron Man gets blasted with his ray that literally dissolves his lower half. So you see the top half is his armor, lower half is just the skeleton. There's a good picture of Beast and Wasp being burnt alive, and Ant-Man being eaten by one of the serpent heads. So the remaining heroes.
Yeah, the remaining heroes. It's the most oddest assortment you'd ever think of, but it's brilliant, the cast they put together.
So you have Wolverine, Doctor Doom, Thor, Sabretooth, the Gray Hulk, Cloak from Cloak and Dagger, Phoenix or Rachel Gray or Rachel Summers from the X-Men,
and Wondar the Aquarian,
who looks like Jesus.
Who Wondar was it's funny because he is originally a Steve Gerber character.
From the Defenders, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, he debuted in Man-Thing. He originally started, believe it or not, out as a kind of Superman riff, where basically he came in an alien spaceship, but like similar to Superman, but whereas Superman like didn't really age like he did, but he did, and so he was like this fully formed adult, or started out as this fully formed adult that had like super strength and similar to Superman powers, but was a complete child because he had no education. And then eventually in those comics he did educate himself and became this like philosopher Christ-like figure, and like his powers changed to this null field thing. So that's kind of the background on him. Very obscure character, even back then.
So their plan, Wolverine and Sabretooth come up with the plan that in order to stop Set, they have to murder their friends. The women who are going to become the brides of Set is the only kind of like their last ditch effort. And like Thor and the Aquarian are not too keen on it. Dr. Doom and the Hulk jump right on board. So they go after these 7 women and essentially just get their asses handed to them.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is like well, first they have to take out like the New Mutants and all the Serpent Men eyes Marvel characters, which they do very easily. And they basically, you see the Hulk like basically, smash Spider-Man's head into the ground, and like, Wolverine like takes out the Punisher. But then like, they even comment, it's like, well, Wolverine, like, you could tell like they weren't even acting at their full strength because their minds were so warped because of the Serpent Men thing. And so that's when the brides eventually show up, and basically just shows how powerful these female characters were. I mean, like, basically, kind of deceptively, some of the most powerful characters in the Marvel universe. I mean, like,
especially Scarlet Witch, like she's able to manipulate Wolverine's atoms and pretty much make him explode. She throws him into the Aquarian.
She
turns
basically
adamantium into antimatter.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and like, that was even before Scarlet Witch had the power level in the comics we have now. That was basically when she was still just using her regular mutant hex power, as opposed to in conjunction with magic. But it's like her hex power, even going back to like, the original like Cap's Kooky Quartet Avengers run, basically could just do whatever the writer needed it to do in that moment, which in this moment turns Wolverine into antimatter, which basically, when meeting the positive matter in Aquarian's null field, creates an explosion that basically only leaves Wolverine's adamantium skeleton left.
She's able to turn the Hulk back into Bruce Banner, and I believe like She-Hulk just crushes his head. Eventually, everyone dies in this issue. And then they say that the brides gave birth to the children of Set, and then were immediately devoured by their children. And there's literally a panel where you see this giant snake with She-Hulk's legs sticking out of it. And then it goes on to say that then these 7 snake gods devoured every last person on the planet Earth before moving on to new dimensions to conquer. So literally everyone on the Earth is killed.
Yeah, I mean,
there's the picture right there with the serpent with She-Hulk's legs sticking out of its mouth.
I mean, despite the fact that like Quasar does use the Eye of Agamotto to banish Set into a pocket dimension, but again, at the end of the story, Set's children still remain.
That's true. Yeah. So Quasar kind of merges with, becomes like amalgamation of Doctor Strange and Quasar, and turns. It's almost like a Godzilla movie. He turns like into a giant, like 50 feet tall. But they get sucked into this pocket dimension.
Yeah, it's like Thor almost gets killed, but Gaia decides to save him at the last minute. And like Doctor Doom just has a great, like he has this great moment where, he tries as hard as he puts all of his power into this force field. He's like, I cannot be defeated. I am Doom. I am Doom. And like, you see him melting basically.
Yeah.
That's classic Doctor Doom stuff.
This one reminds me a lot of the second run of What If, where it got really super dark. I really kind of enjoyed this one for just the sheer carnage.
And here's one thing I will say is that what if the Marvel superheroes lost Atlantis Attacks? Probably more worth your time to read than the actual Atlantis Attacks crossover.
I was going to say that. I would say from what I remember of Atlantis Attacks, I had way more fun reading this issue than I had reading any of the annuals from that miniseries or from that crossover.
And here's the one thing I'll say is that when the second volume of What If does these issues, they actually do a really good job of explaining what you need to know about Atlantis attacks coming into the story.
Mhm.
But it's the one thing with What If, I think to really enjoy this series, you do have to have a pretty good basic understanding of your mainline Marvel characters.
Yeah, I would say some of the stories do get very kind of lost in the minutia, so it definitely helps if you know the original story. Well, with that being said, I would say like the first of the original series, the first, because I actually have that came out in a trade paperback. I think there's 2 volumes that kind of do the first 20 issues or so. With these, you don't have to know the stories as well. These are much broader kind of strokes. I think you can still find this on Amazon for cheap. And then, like I said, the Agents of Atlas is still on Amazon, if I'm not mistaken, as well.
Yeah, and it's like honestly, like other kind of like Marvel alternate universe stuff, like if you're more of an X-Men fan, definitely seek out the X-Files or the Exiles series. That's like all sorts of alternate X-Men stuff, but there's a lot of like alternate Avengers and stuff in those stories too. Also, Avengers Forever is a really good one.
Didn't they do an X-Men Forever as well?
I think they did.
Yeah, so yeah, it's basically exploring the history and alternate history of the Avengers and the X-Men and the Exiles. I remember I got the first series of Exiles. I was collecting that when it was coming out, and that was a team of X-Men just hopping to various different Earths and realities. That was a really kind of fun book as well.
Yeah, and it's like those of you that are interested in upcoming MCU stuff, not only is there a What If animated series coming out, which is going to be dealing with what if versions of stuff that's been seen in the MCU, but also the Loki series features an organization called the Time Variance Authority, who factored into a lot of what if stories. The Time Variance Authority is essentially the Marvel Universe equivalent of the Time Lords. They're basically in charge of managing these alternate realities and making sure that things don't get too off the rails, which I'm guessing with Loki having the Tesseract, things get off the rails. So they feel like they have to step in and check him. It's like the Time Variance Authority. They show up in some of these what if ones, especially some of the ones. Like I think next time we do a what if, we'll talk about a big crossover that What If did called Timequake, where actually you had a story that ran through 5 consecutive what if issues, where the TVA and the Timekeepers, who were big in the Exile series, factored in.
I'm looking forward to it. Like I said, when Patrick started pitching what ifs, I told him to hold off because you had already thrown in yours. But I'm a big fan. Well, we're both a big fan of not only what if, but just alternate history in general. You got both Brad and I into that book series. What is it? Island in the Sea of Time, was it? Which and then there was another series, alternative history. Who was the
1632.
Author? What was the name of the author? We actually met
SM
him.
Sterling. Yeah, we met SM Sterling at MarsCon.
Years ago.
Yeah.
SM Sterling, Island of the Sea of Time, and was it 1632?
That was that was Eric Flint. 1632.
Well, they're both good alternative history. Man in the High Castle, another great kind of alternative history. Like I said, we could go on all day. This episode has already run way late, but I knew with Ed on it was going to.
I talk a lot.
He does, but right before the story, the episode started, I told him that he could pontificate as much as he wanted, because like I said, I really miss this. This is very reminiscent of a lot of conversations we had back in the dressing room out of Little Theater of Norfolk.
It's kind of how Sean and I bonded.
Yeah. So we are going to be taking 2 weeks off. So there will be no episodes for the next 2 weeks, but we will be back on April 8th with Sydney Aston, who is a local actress. She actually has a very small part in Wonder Woman 1984. And
what are you guys going to talk about?
We're going to be talking about Alias / Jessica Jones. Also coming up, we have the X-Men, the pre-Uncanny X-Men from the late 60s, written by Roy Thomas. We have Sandman Mystery Theater coming, and we have Miss Marvel, also now known as Captain Marvel, but Carol Danvers' first series. We're going to be looking at that as well. So that's all coming starting April 8th. As far as stuff going on, Earprov, we have, was it American Debaters this Friday? We have the, what's Saturday on Earprov, Matt?
It's the Sweat List improvised stand-up comedy show, 8 p.m.
Excellent. And then on Sunday, it is Sketchmageddon, which you can watch here on the Push Comedy Facebook page. It's all sketch comedy. And then this Saturday, Brad McMurran and I are going to be recording a bunch of Nerds of Comedy episodes. Columbo. He and I are big Columbo fans. For some reason, the Columbo episodes on the Nerds of Comedy page has blown up, so we're going to be recording some more of those. So you'll be seeing those coming soon.
It's something that Brad is passionate about, and
he is a big murder mystery fan.
And Sean, if I could interject,
yes, please.
When are we going to do a spinoff show where you and I talk about our other love, pro wrestling?
You know what? I've been I had gotten out of wrestling, but I've recently started getting back into it. I'll talk to you about that. I'll talk about you about that off air.
I'd be interested to hear your takes on the current scene.
I really hated / enjoyed the AEW pay-per-view that just happened, and it was not without its problems. It wasn't, but it was not without its high points either. I agree. It's some good and some bad. And then last night's AEW Dynamite I watched for the first time in a long, long time. And I have incredible mixed emotions on a lot of things. I'm not a hardcore wrestler fan, but I do love me some Thunder Rosa, and that match. Again, we're now talking about wrestling. 5 stars. The comic books. I agree. Right, I enjoyed the hell out of that match. So if people want to see a pro wrestling show starring Ed and myself, there is a lot of pro wrestling fans in the Push Comedy Theater community. Let us know. We could do a pro wrestling show. We have the knowledge. Like I said, we are opposite sides of the same coin. I was a WWE guy. Ed was a WCW guy. Not to mention, Japanese, New Japan, All Japan. Mm-hmm. I even watch Joshi nowadays. Don't get me started on the Joshi. I'm not a big Maki Ito. Not a big fan. William, yes, NWA. I am a huge NWA fan. I'm really excited. The NWA is back this Sunday, so I'm going to be watching that. I was a big fan. You were a big fan of NWA Power as well, weren't you, Ed? I enjoyed it. I didn't like the in-ring product as much as the promos, and it's like AEW has basically rated everyone good that they had, except for Nick Aldis. And the very problematic Marty Scurll. Yeah, but, Thunder Rosa is still, I think, technically NWA. She is. She's working for both companies. But I'm worried that it's only going to be a matter of time before she becomes strictly AEW. Because, like I said, I loved her, and I just love Thunder Rosa. Period. I think she's one of my favorites. I follow her on Instagram, which I don't do a lot of Instagram, but I do follow Thunder Rosa. And then also, if you want to see us live, we are back. We have the monthly Murder Mystery, Unusual Suspects, the Murder Mystery Tour. It's an interactive murder mystery show throughout the Norfolk Neon District. Tickets are on sale. You can go to our Facebook page for that. It is the second weekend of April. So check that out. We just had our first one last weekend, and it was a sellout. It was a blast. It is great to be back outside performing again. So I think that is all the stuff we have, all the stuff we have to talk about.
If I open my mouth again, we're going to be here all night.
It looks like there is some there is some people chiming in about wrestling. So my wife will probably kill me if I start doing another TV show or another show. But like I said, I could talk some wrestling. So we're going to put that on the back burner for now. I have 2 weeks off to think about it and find a way to explain it to my wife if it's going to happen.
Once a month.
Maybe, yeah, that could be doable. But until, like I said, we're going to be off for the next 2 weeks. We will be back on April 8th with Alias / Jessica Jones. Thank you all, everybody who called in. William, Patrick, Brad. Thank you for Pam for donating to us tonight. And again, Ed, my dear friend, thank you for being on the Funny Pages.
Loved it. I got to do dishes now.
And we will see you on April 8th.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Funny Pages on Earprov. Tomorrow night, 8 p.m., American Master Debaters, the silliest fucking debate show in the planet. Who will finish first? Who will be beaten off? Who will overcome? And then on Saturday, it's a Sweatless Improvised Stand-Up Comedy Show. 5 stand-up comedians, 5 random topics, 5 minutes, 8 p.m., earprov.com.